They preach humility. They tell you the meek will inherit the earth. But some of them fly first class to heaven and not commercial to their next crusade. Across Africa, a small circle of men built something that no longer resembles a church. It resembles an airline. Private hangars sitting quietly at the edge of international airports. Custom Gulfstreams parked wingtip to wingtip with jets owned by oil billionaires. Aircraft that, individually, cost more than some of these ministries' entire buildings bought, congregants allege, from the same offering baskets passed hand to hand every Sunday. This isn't a story about faith. It's a story about what happens after faith becomes a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and what these men chose to do with that money once no one could tell them no. Today, we're counting down 10 African pastors reportedly linked to the most expensive private jets on the continent. Some bought theirs quietly. Some had theirs seized by the state. And one man's name is going to come up so often on this list that, by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand exactly why every other pastor's jet gets measured against his. Stay until the end, because the final entry isn't just the most expensive, it's the one that changed the entire conversation about wealth in the African church. Before we start climbing this list, you need to understand the scale of what we're actually talking about. A private jet isn't a luxury car. It's not even a mansion. A single mid-size Gulfstream can cost upward of $30 million before it ever leaves the runway, and that's before fuel, before a full-time flight crew, before hangar fees, before the millions it costs every single year just to keep the aircraft certified and in the sky. Owning one isn't a purchase. It's a recurring financial commitment most Fortune 500 companies think twice about. And yet, across Nigeria alone, church leaders have reportedly spent well over $200 million combined on private aircraft in the last 2 decades. Where does that money come from? Not government subsidy, not corporate sponsorship. It comes from tithes, from offerings, from seed faith, the belief, preached from these same pulpits, that giving your money to the church guarantees God will multiply it back to you. The same congregations funding these jets are, in many cases, the same people struggling to pay school fees, hospital bills, and rent. That contradiction is the engine driving every single controversy on this list. So let's begin with the pastor, whose jet remained a mystery even after his death. We open with a man whose ministry pulled pilgrims from 6 continents into one compound in Lagos. Prophet T.B. Joshua of the Synagogue Church of All Nations. Joshua was, in many ways, unlike every other name on this list. He rarely spoke about money publicly. He never confirmed a net worth. He never posed next to a jet for the cameras the way some pastors ahead of us on this list did. But reports throughout his decades of ministry consistently linked him to a private aircraft used to move his crusade teams and medical outreach programs across borders. Reports he neither confirmed nor denied. That silence became part of his brand. While other megachurch pastors were being dragged for extravagance, Joshua's ministry was busy building a reputation for humanitarian work, disaster relief donations, and prophecy that made international headlines. If he had a jet, and multiple reports insist he did, he made sure the jet was never the story. Even in death in 2021, the full picture of his wealth remains locked behind the same secrecy that defined his ministry, which, in its own way, makes him one of the more fascinating entries on this list, a man wealthy enough to belong here, careful enough that we can't fully prove it. Number 9, on the other hand, built his fortune in full public view, and it happened fast. Number 9 takes us to Delta State, Nigeria, and a ministry that grew faster than almost anyone on this list. Pastor Jeremiah Fufeyin built Christ Mercyland Deliverance Ministry into one of southern Nigeria's most talked about churches, largely off the back of viral miracle claims, healings, deliverances, and testimonies shared across social media faster than any traditional advertising could manage. That virality translated directly into growth. And growth, in Nigerian megachurch economics, translates into aircraft. Reports place Fufeyin among Nigeria's private jet-owning clergy, with some sources linking him to a Bombardier Challenger acquired in the late 2010s, a remarkably fast acquisition for a ministry that, compared to the century-old institutions still ahead of us on this list, is still relatively young. That speed is exactly what makes Fufeyin's entry worth watching. He isn't a legacy pastor who inherited decades of accumulated wealth. He's proof of how quickly a modern Nigerian megachurch, armed with social media virality, instead of old-fashioned crusades, can climb into jet-owning territory in a fraction of the time it took the pastors before him. Number 8 has been doing this since before most of his congregation was born. At number 8, one of the elder statesmen of Nigerian Pentecostalism, a man whose ministry predates almost every megachurch controversy we'll discuss today. Bishop Mike Okonkwo. He left a career in banking in the 1970s to found the Redeemed Evangelical Mission, building it, over 5 decades, into a movement with branches spanning multiple continents. That's the part of his story usually told from the pulpit. The part told less often is that, somewhere along that 5-decade climb, Okonkwo was named among the country's private jet-owning pastors, reportedly the owner of 2 aircraft, according to multiple Nigerian business and lifestyle publications. Unlike the viral scandals ahead of us, Okonkwo's jets never triggered a national uproar. No leaked video, no court case. Just a quiet accumulation of wealth by a man who built his ministry the old-fashioned way, decade after decade, largely outside the social media spotlight that made and unmade the reputations of pastors half his age. Which brings us to number 7, a pastor whose jet purchase didn't stay quiet for even 24 hours. Number 7 is the pastor who turned a single jet purchase into a national argument that dragged in half of Nigerian Christian Twitter. When Omega Fire Ministries' Dubai branch announced Apostle Johnson Suleman's new private jet, the backlash was immediate and loud. Critics, led by broadcaster and outspoken church wealth critic Daddy Freeze, argued the money should have gone toward feeding the poor, not funding another aircraft for a man who already commanded a fleet of luxury cars. Suleman's ministry pushed back hard, framing the jet as a ministry tool, not a personal indulgence necessary, they argued, for a preacher whose crusades span continents on tight schedules. But the moment that made this controversy memorable wasn't Suleman's defense. It was when a much bigger name in Nigerian Pentecostalism jumped into the conversation to back him up, half joking that he'd buy a jet for every pastor under his authority if he could afford it. That name was Bishop David Oyedepo. And that's not a coincidence we're mentioning in passing, because Oyedepo is about to become the gravitational center of this entire list. We're at the halfway point now, and from here, the entries stop being about isolated purchases and start being about empires, broadcasting empires, political empires, and, in one case, an empire that collapsed into a federal investigation. At number 6, the founder of one of Africa's largest media-driven ministries, a man who understood, earlier than almost anyone on this list, that owning the broadcast signal was more powerful than owning the building. Pastor Chris Oyakhilome built Christ Embassy into a satellite television empire, with Love World programming reaching congregations across multiple continents, 24 hours a day, whether or not anyone ever set foot inside one of his physical churches. That broadcasting reach is precisely what makes his jet story different from everyone else on this list. Reports say his private aircraft wasn't purchased outright by the ministry. It was gifted to him directly by members of his own congregation. Supporters call it devotion proof of how deeply his followers believe in his ministry. Critics call it something closer to dependency, a congregation so financially entangled with their pastor's lifestyle that gift-giving on this scale starts to look less like generosity and more like an unspoken obligation. Either way, the jet became one more data point in a decades-long debate about where devotion ends and exploitation begins. Number 5's jet made headlines for an entirely different reason, because it ended up at the center of a federal money laundering case. Number 5 belongs to a man who, for a period, held more institutional power than any other name on this list. The former president of the Christian Association of Nigeria, the country's most powerful interfaith body. Pastor Oritsejafor owned a Bombardier Challenger 601, an aircraft reportedly worth around $3.5 million, which multiple reports say was received as a gift rather than purchased outright. On paper, that's not dramatically different from Oyakhilome's story at number 6, but Oritsejafor's jet became infamous for a very different reason. In 2014, a private jet linked to Oritsejafor's ministry was connected to a scandal involving $9.3 million in cash, seized by South African authorities from foreign nationals attempting to bring the money into the country, undeclared an incident that dragged Nigeria's federal government, its central bank, and Oritsejafor's own reputation into an international money laundering investigation. Oritsejafor denied direct involvement in the cash itself, but the association between his aircraft and a federal cash smuggling scandal followed him for the rest of his leadership of CAN. A jet meant to symbolize blessing became, almost overnight, a symbol of everything critics feared was happening behind closed doors in Nigeria's wealthiest ministries. Number 4's jet controversy started the same way public backlash over the purchase itself, but his ministry simply grew too large for the criticism to matter. At number 4, the man some call the single most influential pastor on the African continent, a title that isn't hyperbole once you see the scale of what he built. Enoch Adeboye leads the Redeemed Christian Church of God, a congregation reportedly numbering in the millions across more than 190 countries, one of the largest religious organizations on earth, Christian or otherwise. In 2009, amid heavy public criticism over church wealth, Adeboye acquired a Gulfstream jet, reportedly worth around $30 million. Later reporting suggests his ministry's fleet expanded to 2 aircraft, used to move him between the dozens of countries his ministry now operates in. Here's what makes Adeboye different from Oritsejafor and Suleman. The backlash never stuck. Defenders, including Pastor Matthew Ashimolowo, who we'll return to shortly, have pointed to his brutal international travel schedule as justification, describing itineraries where Adeboye is expected in Toronto and Washington within hours of each other, schedules no commercial airline could realistically support. His headquarters outside Lagos, Redemption Camp, is so vast it functions as its own town, complete with its own postal code, university, and permanent population. It is, in miniature, proof of exactly how far a single ministry's reach can extend when nothing stands in its way. We're closing in on the top 3 now, and this is where the numbers stop sounding like ministry budgets and start sounding like corporate aviation fleets. Number 3 takes us out of Nigeria entirely into London, home to the largest Pentecostal church in the United Kingdom. Pastor Matthew Ashimolowo, a Kaduna-born convert from Islam, founded Kingsway International Christian Center in 1992 and built it into a media and ministry powerhouse spanning Europe, Africa, and the Middle East through his own television network. For over a decade, Ashimolowo has also been the loudest public defender of pastors owning private jets, arguing, in a widely circulated 2012 television interview, that out of an estimated 20 million clergy across Nigeria, perhaps only 6 actually own aircraft, and that their brutal international travel schedules justify it. That argument might have quietly stayed in the past if not for October 2024. That month, Abuja megachurch Koza welcomed Ashimolowo to its leadership summit with a video posted to its own social media, boasting about his arrival, 3 separate Rolls-Royces and a private jet, set to triumphant music. Captioned as an insane VIP arrival, the clip was meant to celebrate him. Instead, it went viral for exactly the opposite reason critics tore into the display as tone-deaf, arriving in a country where, as one commenter put it, ordinary members no fit afford bag of rice. The jet itself has never been officially confirmed as Ashimolowo's own property versus one chartered for the event. But the footage, 3 Rolls-Royces and an aircraft, filmed and posted by the church itself, with pride, is now the single most widely seen piece of evidence connecting his name to this list. Sometimes the scandal isn't the purchase, it's the church proudly filming it. Number 2 is the only entry on this entire list whose jet didn't just make headlines. It ended up in a government evidence file. Prophet Shepherd Bushiri, the Malawian founder of the Enlightened Christian Gathering, built one of the fastest-growing prosperity ministries in southern Africa and celebrated it in one widely reported ceremony by becoming the youngest man ever recorded, taking delivery of a Gulfstream jet, reportedly worth around $37 million. For a period, multiple reports ranked him second only to Bishop David Oyedepo in total private aircraft owned among the world's pastors, a ranking that, as you're about to see, turned out to be darkly ironic. Then came the fall. In February 2019, South Africa's elite investigative police unit, the Hawks, seized a second Bushiri aircraft, a Bombardier Challenger 604, alleging it had been purchased using funds obtained through fraud and fabricated loan documents. Bushiri and his wife, Mary, were charged with fraud, money laundering, and violations of South Africa's exchange control regulations. Released on bail, the couple fled to Malawi in 2020 rather than face trial, denying all charges and calling the case politically motivated. The jet sat impounded at Lanseria Airport for years. Then, in April 2025, South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority won court approval to sell it outright now, valued at roughly 50 million rand, with proceeds earmarked to compensate Bushiri's alleged victims. Bushiri responded publicly, calling the sale unjust, pointing to a separate Malawian court that had dismissed related charges against him, and vowing to keep fighting. As of this recording, the aircraft remains a live legal battle, not a closed case. A private jet, unveiled as a triumphant symbol of God's blessing, seized years later as evidence in a federal fraud case. Of everyone on this list, no one's aircraft tells a more complete story about the collision between prosperity, gospel wealth, and the law than Shepherd Bushiri's. Which brings us, finally, to number 1. The name every other pastor on this list gets measured against. And here he is, the name that kept surfacing throughout this entire countdown because every single other pastor's jet, at some point, gets compared to his. Bishop David Oyedepo isn't just a pastor who happens to own a jet. Reports describe him as the owner of an entire private fleet, a Gulfstream I, a Gulfstream IV, a Gulfstream V, and a Bombardier Challenger 604, with his own dedicated hangar built at one of Nigeria's busiest international airports, specifically to house them. No commercial terminal, no shared gate, a hangar built for one ministry's aircraft alone. Forbes named him Africa's wealthiest pastor as far back as 2011, with later estimates placing his net worth north of $150 million, and some more recent reports pushing that figure past $180 million. His Gulfstream V alone reportedly cost around $30 million. Purchased the same year, international rankings placed Nigeria among the poorest nations on earth by GDP per capita, a timeline critics have never let him forget. Oyedepo built more than a fleet. He built Faith Tabernacle, a 50,000-seat auditorium once recognized by the Guinness Book of Records as the largest church building in the world. He founded Covenant University, one of Nigeria's top-ranked private universities. He built Dominion Publishing House. In terms of sheer institutional footprint, no other name on this list comes close. Some of his aircraft have reportedly since been listed for sale, quietly, without the fanfare of their original acquisition. But the image is already fixed in the public imagination, and it isn't going anywhere. A private hangar, 4 jets, and an auditorium built to hold 50,000 people who came seeking a miracle, while their pastor never once has to wait in an airport line. So here's the question this entire list leaves behind, unanswered, because no one on any side of this debate has ever fully settled it. Is this the fruit of faith proof, as Oyedepo's own supporters would argue, that God blesses those who serve him at scale? Or is it a warning sign, hiding in plain sight for decades, about what happens when a religious movement grows large enough to become an unaccountable financial empire? That debate isn't ending anytime soon. Not for Oyedepo, not for Bushiri, still fighting a South African court over his seized jet, not for Ashimolowo, still explaining that viral Rolls-Royce arrival, and certainly not for the next pastor who decides a Gulfstream is the right way to answer God's calling. 10 pastors, 10 jets, and one question none of them have ever fully answered. Where does ministry end and empire begin? If this list left you with more questions than answers, that's the point. So here's what I want you to do before you go. Drop a comment and tell me, which one of these 10 shocked you the most, Bushiri's seized jet or Oyedepo's private hangar? I read every comment, and the most requested name gets its own full investigation next. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel exists to dig into the stories about power and money in Africa that don't get told anywhere else. And we drop videos like this on a steady. And if this video actually taught you something, do one thing for me. Share it with one person who needs to see it. That's how a channel like this grows. Not ads, not luck, just people passing it on. See you in the next one.